But you know, I already mentioned the fact that Warren Rudman headed this investigation into Fannie Mae, and this was after he had been out of office, and Fannie Mae was in serious trouble for the first time with the SEC, and Fannie and Freddie, as Bill knows, was the king of the roost for a long time, and it was difficult to get any kind of reform legislation because they had become so powerful. And it wasn't until Warren's committee put their report in front of our committee exclusively where we saw exactly what had gone wrong at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And I am eternally grateful for Warren and his leadership. It's so typical of what Warren did. And he didn't mince any words in his testimony and stood up well under some withering questions from the committee. But at that time, we ultimately tried to pass a bill. We did pass a bill in the House dealing with Fannie and Freddie, but it unfortunately wasn't good enough for the Senate. It died. That was in 2005. I strongly think had we passed that legislation in 2005 through both houses and we'd gotten the President to sign it, it would have had a big mitigating factor when in 2008 and 2009 Fannie and Freddie essentially became wards of the state, and our cost of the taxpayer is upwards to $170 billion. But that's water under the bridge right now. But as far as Warren was concerned, fiscal responsibility was almost his two middle names. The Graham-Rudman, that was when I first came to Congress. You heard about Graham-Rudman. It was all about budget issues. It was all about trying to be fiscally responsible. To tell you how far we've come, and not in a positive way, I remember when 1982, my second year in the Congress, we were debating the budget, and Bob Walker from Pennsylvania was kind of the overseer of all things budget. He was always on the floor and waving his arms around and predicting Armageddon. And I remember particularly Bob Walker saying that that we're going to face $100 billion in deficits every year for the eye, as far as the eye can see. $100 billion, really. Now we're $17 trillion in debt and going higher. When I got elected to the legislature back in the early 70s, and that's where I learned the M word. And then I got to Congress, and I learned the B word, and then I retired, and I'm a private citizen, and a continuing taxpayer, and I had to learn the T word. So we've gone from millions to billions to trillions, basically in my career, or at least my career lifetime. That is the kind of issue that faces us, and frankly, is the root cause of all of the consternation that's going on in Washington today. We've got a crisis, an economic crisis. We've got the government closed down, or at least most of it. We face a deadline with the national debt and the debt ceiling. So we've got a crisis, economic crisis. We also got a crisis of democracy. And while I'm not going to get into all the details of what's going on today, and I get asked virtually every day by somebody, aren't you glad you're not there now? And I say, yeah, I am. But I have a great deal of empathy for my friend the Speaker and other members on both sides of the aisle. I think seeing Bill today reminded me of, people say, well, what do you miss, if anything, about the Congress? And I said, I really, at the end of the day, I miss the friendships, the relationships I had with members on both sides of the aisle from all over the country. We've got such a diverse, remarkable country that to serve with these people on their committees and to socialize with them, to learn a little bit about what Southwest Mexico, New Mexico's like, or it was just fascinating. And one of the great lessons, and very few people are given that privilege, that Bill and Warren and I had to experience that. And that really is something that I've stayed with me, and part of the reason why I miss it in some respects, despite all of the nasty kind of thing that's going on. Well, I was in Congress in 95, 96 when we went through this exercise again. Most of you look old enough to remember that. I'll just give you a vignette of what happened in my district. The government was closed down for the first time in a long, long time, and it was going on for several weeks. And I had two veterans and their wives who were vacationing in Hawaii, and they could not visit the Arizona Memorial, which of course is there since the Japanese attack in 1941. They came back and wrote a letter to the editor of my hometown paper, just ripping me up and down about the fact the government's closed, and here they basically spent all that money to go out to Hawaii and couldn't visit the Arizona Memorial. And boy, that stuck with me, and I thought, boy, that is, this is dangerous territory, and I think some of these members are going to find out over the next several days the effect it's going to have on everybody. So let's be careful about how we deal with these issues. I don't have all the answers, but the fact is the economic health of the United States is critically important to the world. Critically important to the world. We're the dollar is the world's reserve currency, still is. Everybody looks to the United States for that leadership and that stability. When I'm with NASDAQ and I do some big issues with NASDAQ, we always talk about the depth of the markets in the United States and how people throughout the world want to invest in the United States because of its stability. You don't see them investing in Venezuela, you don't see them investing in Greece. They come here because of the stability and the solidity of what our markets are. And if we make the mistake of letting our obligations pass, we will pay for that for a long time. And we simply can't allow that to happen. On the other hand, we've got terrible problems with our long-term debt. $16.7 trillion and counting. Pat and I just had our first grandchild, our grandson. He was born about a year and a half ago. Our price on his head right now, $53,000. The time that he left his mother's womb, and growing every bit that we've got. Our debt to GDP ratio now exceeds 100%. It was about 50% as recently as 1988. So we've got some serious problems, and part of the debate going on in the Congress is about some real issues and some real importance to the history of our country. And that's really what all of us need to keep in mind, and we hope our leaders keep in mind too. The good news is that while the government can't seem to handle its debt, individuals in this country have reduced their debt load over the last couple of years by 12%. 12%. That's the average guy out there making the tough decisions in his household budget, sitting around the kitchen table making those decisions with his family. Would that we could do that in Washington. So we come to the fact that now with what has happened with the Great Recession and the meltdown, passage of Dodd-Frank, where the government is essentially making private sector decisions. We bail out financial companies, we even bail out auto companies with taxpayer dollars. So the intermingling of the private sector and the public sector continues to grow and strengthen. We used to always talk about fiscal responsibility. Everybody thought, what's Washington? It's the government, the federal government. Now, more and more, it's the private sector. To make that point, let me take you back a few years. Again, most of you look old enough to remember 2001. At the beginning of 2001, Enron was the 7th largest company in the United States. They were traded, they had returns of some 20% on equity. The leaders of Enron were featured in Business Week and on the cover of virtually every business magazine. Jeff Skilling, Ken Lay, Andy Fastow, smartest guys in the room. Early in 2001 announced the strongest code of ethics of any company, according to them. Strongest code of ethics in the country. Their stock was doing well. You would be probably sued for malpractice if you were a broker or a financial advisor for not advising your client to own Enron. And later that spring, Enron inexplicably filed a restatement of earnings. Later that summer, Jeff Skilling stepped down. And later that summer, they filed another restatement. and by December had filed bankruptcy, the 7th largest company in America. The media was full of stories. They couldn't get enough of Houston and what had happened. They interviewed employees or former employees, people who had lost their jobs. They had their life savings in one fell swoop. Shocking. It affected their customers. It affected their suppliers. It affected a wide web of companies and employees, and it had an enormous effect on the body politic. It had an enormous effect on the market. Why? Because we had, in the 25 years from, say, 1980 onward, in those 25 years, we in the United States had developed the largest investor class in the history of the world. When I went to Congress in 1981, well, not exactly the last century. Well, it was the last century. When I went to Congress in 1981, 2/3 of our savings were in the bank deposits, and only 1/3 were in equities. 25 years later, it was just the reverse. 2/3 of our savings were in equities, 1/3 in bank deposits. When I went to Congress in 1981, only 1/3 of American households owned stock. In 2001, it was 54%. The average guy working on the line, building tires at Cooper Tire and Rubber Company in Findlay, Ohio, my hometown. And when I would go out to campaign and talk to these guys building tires, these big, strong guys building tires, they were so proud of the fact that they were saving for their future and for their kids' future. And they would say, I'm saving for my kids' college. They're going to be the first generation to go to college in our family. And we've got a 401k and we're buying Cooper stock. And you saw that all over the place. People in their 401ks, IRAs, people trading online. You said the advent of cable shows about stocks and the like. Everybody was an investor, or at least it seemed that way. So that's why the shocking news that came out of Houston was so manifest, because virtually all of us had some skin in that game. And we knew intuitively that something wasn't right. Something had gone horribly wrong with a system that everybody had pretty well felt comfortable with. And so the board of Enron wisely hired the dean of the University of Texas Law School to head up a study of what went wrong at Enron. His name was Dean William Powers, and he is now the chancellor of the entire University of Texas educational system. He and another fellow who had been with the SEC, who was down in private practice, but they put together this incredible study about Enron. And our committee was the only committee to hear their testimony. And that was in early 2002. And what they said, in essence, what his report said, what Dean Powers told us, he said in every case at Enron during that crisis, the gatekeepers at Enron had failed in their responsibility. The auditors, the analysts, the attorneys, the board, the credit rating agencies. They rattled off virtually every potential entity that could have slowed down, if not stopped, this activity that was going on, this illegal activity. Special purpose entities, cooking the books, if you will. And so that's what we used as the basis for what the law, which gave me a new first name, when we passed it. And we passed it in the House first. Now, we passed it in the House, by the way, it was 423 to 3, all right? 423 to 3, that's not bad. That's like an Ohio State score sometimes. But I digress. But 423 is pretty good. So then we go to the Senate, and the Senate was deliberating, which they do very well, but they were deliberating on this stuff, and then WorldCom hits. WorldCom, this tiny little telecommunications company down in Mississippi, of all places, buys one of the breakthrough new phone companies, telecommunications companies in the world, and Bill McGowan, who had started MCI, and it sold out to Bernie Evers and that crowd. So all of a sudden you've got the minnow swallowing the whale. And then what they did with that company is just incredible. Guess what? A lot of you had stock in that company too, in your IRA or 401k. And so it went on and on. And by the way, as bad as Enron was, a lot of people think WorldCom was 4 times larger than Enron. 4 times larger. So the shock to the public was immense. I would go home, go to my local Rotary Club where I've been a member for 30 years. And believe me, I represent a very conservative pro-business district, particularly my hometown. We've got 2 Fortune 500 companies in a town of 40,000 people. We are the epitome of pro-business. And the attitude towards CEOs in my conservative Rotary Club was something like this: let's give them a fair trial and then hang them. When I would go on the floor of the House as chairman, I literally would be beset upon by my colleagues pulling me aside, wanting to tell me the latest horror story from their district about somebody who had lost their life savings in one of these companies. And of course, it wasn't those two, just those two: Global Crossing, Tyco, many Adelphia, kind of a rogues gallery of miscreants that went on. So the Senate then ultimately passed their bill, and it was signed July 30th, 2002. Not that I would remember, but that was the date. So, and then it was the fact that we had lost investor confidence that was the most important thing to take out of this. Because at the heart of capitalism is the individual investor. You can have all the bright ideas you want, all the stuff you want to invent, all these companies you want to build, but if you don't have somebody who invests and believe in you, you're nowhere. So the individual investor has been the core of our system from the get-go. In many ways, it differentiates us from virtually every other country in the world. But that faith in the market by investors is very fragile. And it's important that we keep that in mind. So the goal of SOX was to restore investor confidence through more transparency and accountability. That was the basis behind it. Some people claim we went too far. Some people claim it's too expensive. Some people claim it caused the Johnstown flood. And we've been blamed for virtually everything, bad rep. But I think at the end of the day, the goal was, and still is, did it do what it was supposed to do? It was supposed to keep this stuff from happening, that is, accounting fraud. We've gone 11 years now, plus we haven't anything anywhere near that. It was such a catastrophic event. So I'm proud of the fact that we were able to do that. And I'm proud of the fact that during that whole time we didn't have one bailout of anybody. To show you how things have changed from early in the decade to the end of the decade. So then we get to the end of the decade with a lot of irresponsible behavior, excessive risk by companies that ought to know better, and now all this massive cleanup we're still involved in years later. And it's too bad that it happened that way. But it also affected our economy. It affected the whole issue of taxing and spending. We lost, in Enron and WorldCom and those other companies, we lost $8 trillion. There's that T word again. $8 trillion in market cap in the year 2001, 2002. $8 trillion market cap. So when I hear a CEO complain about the cost of Sarbanes-Oxley, I say, how much did your stock lose in 2001? Because it wasn't just the companies that were bankrupting or were in trouble, it was every company, because everybody lost faith in the market and that market went down. So that guy's market cap went down, even though he was doing everything right. So in essence, we're all in this together. Then, 2008 rolls around, we got London Wales, we got all this kind of stuff going on in the market among the financial community. Totally irresponsible behavior. They did us one better, and then we lost $11 trillion at that time. So you add those up and you say, how is the individual investor going to get back in the market? How is the individual investor, what can they say? I've got good friends of mine who are business people, lawyers, well-educated, who got out of the market in 2008 and haven't been back. Big mistake on their part, because the market came back, but there are a lot of people like that. So how do we restore that investor confidence, that individual investor? The institutions are always going to invest because they've got basically no place else to go, particularly with the interest rates they are today. That's the issue we've got before us. So to the business students, the law students, anybody that's an investor or whatever you are, we have a major, major responsibility to restore that investor confidence. To get those people to take that money out from under their mattress and invest it in America. Because that's how we create jobs, that's how we have economic growth, that's how we have economic progress. And at the end of the day, it makes us more fiscally responsible because we don't have bailouts from the taxpayers. We don't have a shrinking market that shrinks tax take. Just as an example, and then I'll close. One of the reasons that we had 4 years of a balanced budget, a lot of people forget that, but it was in the 90s, mid-90s. Our good friend John Kasich was chairman of the Budget Committee. He takes full credit for it. Yeah, typical Kasich, right? Got him elected governor of Ohio, so that's pretty good. But anyway, we were able to do that, partly because we had the peace dividend at the end of the Second World War. I mean, yeah, the end of the second, basic Cold War, I'm sorry, Cold War. And so I looked at the numbers the other day. The take that the government got on capital gains was huge, and it just poured in. But alas, a part of that was the dot-com bubble. People were buying dot-com companies like crazy, like crazy. They didn't care what it looked like. They didn't care if they made any money. They just were buying into these just like lemmings. And it was amazing to see it. Some of those dot-com companies had higher capitalization than like General Electric or General Motors. It was that huge. They didn't make any money. And so that added to the whole idea that we could get rich quick. Well, of course, when that bubble burst, the markets came back down. It was nice to have 4 years of balanced budget. Alan Greenspan announced the end of the 30-year bond, but at the end of the day, it came back to haunt us as well. Well, it's been a great opportunity to talk to you, and I really do enjoy New Hampshire. Love to get back up here. And Warren Rudman was just a great leader. We need more Warren Rudmans in the Congress. We sometimes take people with his integrity and we take it for granted. I suppose you do in New Hampshire because that's what you learn up here, and that's what you expect. And so we do need more Rudmans. So what a great thing it is to have this institution named after him. And congratulations to all of you who make it work and make it to what I think is going to be a signature institution up here for a long, long time. Thank you all very much. I understand to take some questions.
Particularly students, to ask questions, and we will call on you.
I'll do that, yeah. Okay. All right, any questions, accusations, whatever. Normally these students aren't very, who is it? Oh, yes, yeah.
Very thoughtful.
Okay. Well, we'll get that more.
But we're talking about how we spend too much money in this country. This little city of Concord has written grants or requested grants in millions of dollars, including something for a bear cat, which is like almost like a tank. And the government just sends us the money. We have to stop all these grants. Everybody has their hands out for
Well, that's a good point, and the speaker, to his credit, did away with earmarks. That was one of the driving forces behind it, because members, particularly on Appropriations Committee, could earmark a lot of these funds for all kinds of different pet projects. So ever since Boehner was speaker, there have been no earmarks. So we're making progress on that. But you also need to really take a look at each one of the different divisions of government and determine what is effective and what is not. Well, for example, our budgeting system is just totally crazy. At the end of the fiscal year, if a branch of government, the VA or Department of Labor or whatever, if they haven't spent all their money, then when the new fiscal year starts, they don't get it. They don't get to spend it. It goes back. So guess what? So now this is a time of year where they're just buying everything. And so there's no disincentive otherwise. And so I think we really need a full new look at how we budget. Paul Ryan was a good friend of mine from Wisconsin, ran for vice president. I was a really smart guy, and a Miami grad. He has got some really good ideas about how we should really change the whole structure, not just the congressional budget process, but the whole federal government budget process as well. And now's the best time to do it, when people are paying attention and when the sacred cows are somewhat on the run. So I think you make a great point. Yes?
Besides stocks, what is your favorite bill that you've ever had get passed?
Wow, that's a great question. I think the bill that I got passed that has the most lasting effect was in telecommunications. I was on the telecommunications committee for 14 years. When I came in, digital communications was just beginning, and wireless was just beginning, really. And the way the government allocated spectrum in those days was to have a lottery. So you and I and some of your students could get together and go form a group and get in the lottery. We didn't have to know anything about telecommunications. And if we hit the lottery, guess what? Verizon come knocking on our door. And they're basically saying, name your price. It was outrageous. It was filled with cronyism, and it was just ludicrous. And so I introduced a bill to replace the lottery with an auction. And I basically got laughed out of the room. The chairman of the committee wouldn't give me a hearing. Chairman of the subcommittee ignored me. And so I kept introducing this bill. And I got nowhere during the Reagan administration, or even anywhere during the Bush administration, the first Bush administration. So Bill Clinton gets elected. It's funny how things work. Bill Clinton gets elected. He picks Leon Panetta, a colleague of mine from California in the House, to be the budget director. And Leon and I used to play basketball together. I know him pretty well. Those were the good old days when Democrats and Republicans played basketball together. Anyway, Leon called me. And he said, I was looking at your bill. And he said, I think we can do business. He said, I think if we have an auction, we can raise an awful lot of money for the federal government, because after all, the public owns the airwaves. And so essentially Leon and I rolled the chairman, the subcommittee chairman, and we put it in reconciliation during the budget process. And the early next year, we had the first auction. First auction, this was 1993, raised $16.5 billion, first auction. And now subsequently, we've seen how well it works. Not only did it work in terms of producing revenue for the taxpayers, but it also jump-started the digital revolution. And now we've got compressed digital, and I speak to high school. I would speak to high schools a lot when I was in Congress. And I remember somebody asked me a similar question, and I said, these are high school seniors. I said, how many of you have a cell phone? Well, everybody right there. Yeah. And I said, when I was in school, our idea of high tech was they herd us down to the gymnasium once a month, and we'd see an old movie that was made in 1940 or something. So there we go. Everybody had a cell phone. I said, do you guys know how this works? Well, yeah, we just push, we tax and all this kind of stuff. No, I said, no, how does it really work? So I explained it to him. I explained out Bill. Oh, yeah. Well, now, of course, we take that for granted, right? Now I'd say, who doesn't have a cell phone, right? So it really is. And so I think that, right, from my perspective, nobody even knows about it. I mean, nobody knows about it. The press, the press either doesn't understand it or doesn't want to understand it. And so they would rather cover Anthony Weiner than, than a bill that actually has some substance to it. Kind of sad. But yeah, I think that's clearly, from my perspective, had more long-lasting effect than anything.
One more question?
Yes?
I have full disclosure, I'm an Ann Arbor native, but I still have tremendous respect for you and all the wonderful work you've done.
Thank you.
But my question actually takes us back to the heartland. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the strongest way forward for your home state, my home state of Michigan. Obviously, there are pockets of the Midwest that are doing great. There are pockets of it, like Detroit, my friendly neighbor 45 minutes away, that are not doing so well. So I'd love to hear where you think our best hope is for getting the Midwest specifically back to its glory days.
One word, fracking. Headline in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, U.S. now the largest producer of energy in the world. Daniel Yergin, who is like the expert on this stuff, wrote the prize. He is probably the walking expert on energy. He predicted just about a year ago that we would pass Russia as the largest energy producer in 5 years. And we did it in 1. Remarkable what's going on. Our law firm is holding a series of seminars on fracking all over the country. I was in Denver a couple weeks ago, Houston, Columbus. We're going to have one in D.C. Next month. Remarkable what's going on. Youngstown, Ohio might have been the poster boy for the Rust Belt, okay? Youngstown, 2 years ago, had an unemployment rate of 11.5%. You know what it is now? 4.5%. Just like that. You're not North Dakota, but other parts of the country. I'm very, very encouraged because of what that means to our long-term economic health. First of all, from internationally, we don't have to rely on the Middle East nearly as much. I mean, let's face it, when we're facing a shortage of oil from the Middle East, we obviously have to be engaged in the Middle East. And the Middle East is like I don't have to tell you all, a tinderbox. By the way, do you know the definition of a moderate in the Middle East? That's somebody who's temporarily out of ammunition. So that changes that whole worldview. Okay? Then it means that our manufacturers can be cost competitive with anybody in the world, because part of the component, particularly in the Midwest, as you know, I hate to use the term Rust Belt, but that energy is a critical component. So that's going to bring jobs back to our area. So I'm really encouraged by that in terms of the tax base, everything. As far as Detroit is concerned, a lot of mismanagement, just corruption. It is terrible. I just think that they had no choice but to go through this painful bankruptcy. I grew up a Tigers fan. I'm fired up for the Tigers in the playoffs. I even became a Lions fan, I'm embarrassed to say. It's been a long time since they've done anything. But yeah, so I thank you for the question, and go blue, particularly when they're playing the other schools like Notre Dame. All right, hey, thank you all very much. Enjoy it.